Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am delighted to be back with you after quite a break. More on that soon, but before that, as we get started, I do want to remind you, as always, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Really does help the podcast, helps the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves, and it is greatly appreciated. Something else that is greatly appreciated, if you are of a mind to do it, is you can go to gsmcpodcast.net, and there you can leave a tip or a donation. That tip helps the entire network, not just this podcast, but it helps the whole network. But it's also greatly appreciated by me because it does help this podcast. This podcast does not work without you, the people who watch it, who listen to it, who support it, who share the videos, the episodes on social media, etc., etc. All of those things help. All of those things are amazing. But if you would like to help out in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. And I thank you in advance or in hindsight if you've already done it, in retrospect, however you want to look at it. Thank you so much for all of your support. So it's been a while, and that was not intentional. It started out with it's just been health related, but first me, then my husband, then my mom. Nothing major. Thankfully, mom could have been major, but it turned out okay. It's still ongoing. So, if you are a person who is a praying person, or you're a person who sends out thoughts into the universe, whatever that might be for you, and you want to wing something out into the universe for my mom, I would be greatly appreciative of that. I know I keep saying greatly appreciative, but I do try to be an appreciative person. So I have had just minor things, allergies, migraines, laryngitis, things that make it hard to record. And then my husband has had slightly bigger things that I needed to help him with and take care of, and we've been trying to address, and then my mom. So it's been a bit of a crazy time. It's been almost a month since the last episode, and now I am working to catch up. So thank you for bearing with me during the break. Thank you for bearing with me as I post to catch up on the interviews, because I have spoken, as always, to some wonderful authors, and I love sharing these interviews with you. It's not about me, it's about the authors and their books and getting those out there. So I am going to try to get those out now as best I can, now that things have settled down a little bit. So usually I ask you, how was your weekend? How was your May? It is now June. I can't believe it's June. We had a colder than usual May. Cooler than usual, I should say. It wasn't cold, but it's normally more summer temperatures here in May, and that didn't happen much. My husband likes it warmer. I don't mind having cooler temperatures, but this past weekend made up for that. It was very strange. It was like 75 on Saturday and in the 90s on Sunday. So just a really big shift between Saturday and Sunday. And then it went back to slightly lower temperatures during this week, but very strange. So of course, we went for a long walk on Sunday and in the heat because, as you do. And then we got in the pool. We weren't completely crazy, just mostly crazy. But I hope that things are going well with you, that your summer, if you are now in summer, if you have kids and they're out of school, maybe they're getting ready to be out of school, if you have graduates and you're taking care of all of those festivities, that's amazing. Congratulations. I hope that things have been going well for you. I would like to talk to you, of course, about a book. And this specific book this week is Honeymoon Stage by Margaux Eliot. You may have read books by Margaux before. She is writing this book under the pen name Margaux Eliot. She usually writes under the name Julia Fine, her name, Julia Fine, and she writes more suspense and thrillers. This is a different book for her, so she is writing it under a pen name, but if you know her and like her already as Julia Fine, then definitely check this one out. But let me go ahead and give you the description of Honeymoon Phase. Honeymoon Stage. It's the night before her wedding, and Cassidy Baum isn't sure she wants to get married. Or maybe she just doesn't want to get married on set, surrounded by cameras and crew, with the crushing weight of everyone watching. As a production assistant, Cassidy's used to being behind the camera, not in front of it. But her fiance is a former child star and musician, and their wedding cake makes the perfect spin off for Honeymoon Stage, the groundbreaking celeb reality show she once worked on. 5 years ago, the show fell apart. For dramatic reasons, Cassidy is still struggling to understand. Now, Cassidy is forced to reckon with what happened on set to search out the truth once and for all before her wedding is broadcast to the world. Rumors, lies, and suspicions come rushing back, and if Cassidy can't figure out a way to make sense of her past, her own happily ever after may not be so happy after all. So this is obviously takes place in the world of reality TV. It takes place in the world of reality TV in the early 2000s, right when we were being introduced to a lot of reality TV for a lot of reasons. And Margaux, I call her Julia in the interview because I asked her and she said that was fine. That is her name. Julia talks about that, the reasons that we got so much more reality TV in the early 2000s. You might remember when that started happening and why, but we do talk about that some in the interview. But we started getting a lot more reality TV and it was new. So the people who were creating the reality TV were also still figuring it out. And that's where Cassidy comes in. She is a production assistant. She gets a job on this show, Honeymoon Stage. It involves a celebrity couple who are newlyweds. They are being followed around in their daily lives. They're showing what is going on in their marriage as much as you ever get in reality TV. And Cassidy is involved in the production. And then we've got dual timelines. So 2003, when she gets the job on Honeymoon Stage, and then 2007, right before she is getting married. And her wedding is now reality TV. Long story, of course, there's a whole progression in there as to how this happens. So you get two different phases. There's also a bit of a mystery in this story, so Cassidy's trying to figure some things out. There's a bit of paranoia on her part as she's kind of swept up into things that she's not always thinking clearly about. But there's a lot of different layers to this, a lot of different entry points depending on what kind of story you like. You get Cassidy's perspective, then you get the behind the scenes look at early 2000s reality TV, and you get the fact that her fiance, as it said, is a former child star, as is the wife of the celebrity couple that is on the reality TV show Honeymoon Stage. So you have two child stars. They actually worked together as former child stars, and there's that dynamic that comes into play in the story as well. So lots of different interesting points in this story, not least of which is remembering what it was like back in the early 2000s, the fashion, the technology, all those things. It's not that long ago, 2003. Sometimes it feels like last week, but it really was 23 years ago, and things have changed quite a bit since then. So it's fun to go back and look at some of that recent history. But let's go ahead and let Julia talk about the book. Again, it is called Honeymoon Stage. The book is by Margaux Eliot. Hi, Julia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I am excited to talk about the book, Honeymoon Stage. Before we do that, though, if you would take just a moment to introduce yourself so my listeners can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So my name is Julia Fine, and I have three novels, sort of speculative, literary, horror adjacent novels under that name. But this book was a totally different kind of book. So Honeymoon Stage is under the name Margaux Eliot as a pen name. And it is a book about a production intern working on an early aughts reality TV show about a pop star and her athlete husband that goes awry. And we follow sort of as the early days of reality TV sort of when people were figuring out how it worked and what it was. And Cassidy, the production assistant, sort of learns that along with everyone else.
Yes. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
Well, it's very clearly inspired by Newlyweds Nick and Jessica, the MTV show from 2003, ran through like 2003 through 2005.
Hmm.
And when it was the 20th anniversary of that show
Oh, geez.
several years
Wow.
ago, which reminded me of it and sort of made me think, like, I wonder how that holds up. And then when I went to look back at it, it really did not hold up at all. It was very clear just how much of the millennial sort of sexism and just inherent misogyny was
Hmm.
targeted at poor Jessica Simpson. And I really
Yeah.
wanted to write something that like gave her more agency and would sort of reclaim that narrative and approach it. Like I feel like a lot of the things that happened in the early 2000s as a culture we're sort of looking at through a different lens with a better
Hmm.
understanding of sort of agency and the pressures on young women. Like I think about like Monica Lewinsky is another
Hmm.
example where I feel like, at the time she was totally vilified. And now when we think about it, you're like, oh, you're just like a really young girl in a terrible position. This is not your fault at all.
Yeah.
And I feel like Jessica Simpson is similar in terms of just being very young, um, you know, manipulated, sort of under the thrall of a system that didn't necessarily appreciate her and like used her as the butt of the joke. And so I wanted to like reclaim that and step out of that. And at the same time, I was super interested in the way that reality television has evolved since its beginnings, which if you really go all the way back, it's like in the 1970s with documentary style things, but the reality TV sort of as we know it sprang up around that time. And
Right.
it's so interesting to look at sort of what people do now that they're aware of the conventions and they know where it's going versus then when it really felt like this new medium where they just had no clue how to do it or what it would be or who would see it and how people would respond. So I found that really,
Mhm.
really interesting.
Yeah. Um, I remember bits and pieces of that show, but the main thing is that really toxic diet culture of the time, and how the
Hmm.
main comment on her was that she was fat. To
Oh,
look back at pictures of her,
it was
and she's not fat. Um,
mhm.
so yeah, Cassidy is the main character, and we also get her point of view.
Yes.
So, what
Mhm.
about her do you think will resonate with readers?
I mean, I think that she's a very typical sort of like of the time period. Like she sort of represents like the average person coming into this situation. When I started writing this, I felt like it would be more interesting to approach it in like a Great Gatsby-esque way where you have like in the Great Gatsby you have like Nick the narrator coming in and witnessing this sort of crazy scene, and so that was sort of the inspiration for Cassidy to come in and be a fly on the wall, but also in the way that we as viewers for reality TV are a fly on the wall. And the thing about reality TV production is then the people who are making it, who are not going to be um, in the public eye in the same way. Like if you're the producer or the production assistant, you can make someone look as dumb as you want. Like it's not
Hmm.
like it's just going to get you viewership and sort of like jump you up the ladder, but there's an ethical consideration there, I think, of sort of like
Yeah.
how far are you willing to push people and what are you willing to do to make good TV. So giving Cassidy that dilemma was super interesting to me and having her be somebody like, I wanted her to feel like, if you were dropped into that situation, it's not like she's totally unusual and special and has, anything the average person doesn't have, but sort of a like, what would you do when faced with these decisions?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. She is somewhat typical in that she goes to LA to pursue her
Hmm.
career, but she's not there to be a famous actress. She is there to work in other ways.
Yeah,
So we get a
yeah,
different
behind the
perspective.
scenes.
Yeah. So Julia was just saying, what would you do if you faced these situations? Talking about Cassidy and what, as the main character, we might find interesting about her, or what we might find as a way to connect with her or resonate with her as the main character. And yeah, I mean, first off, I've never wanted to be a production assistant on a reality TV show, but what would I do? That's one of my favorite things as a reader is to put myself in the character's shoes. What would I do? Usually I say, I don't know. Or sometimes I have very strong opinions, but uh, we get, as the reader, we get to ask ourselves, what would we do if we were put into some of the same situations that Cassidy is put in, not only as the production assistant, but then later when she's having her own TV show with her own wedding, when she's trying to figure out some things that I don't want to get into because there's, I don't want to give away some of the mystery and the things that are going on that she's trying to figure out with the paranoia. But what would you do if you were in Cassidy's position? So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about character development and how Julia likes to approach that. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Julia Fine, in this case writing as Margaux Eliot. Before the break, Julia was talking about the main character, Cassidy, and what about her might resonate with readers. As we get into this second segment, I do want to give you your second and final reminder that you can support the podcast by going to gsmcpodcast.net and leaving a tip. That helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. And whatever you are feeling like giving, donating what could buy me a coffee, or a little more and buying me a paperback. Oh, maybe that's the way I should frame this. Buy me a paperback, buy me a hardback, buy me an audiobook. Because that's what this podcast is all about, the books. So thank you in advance if you do end up going to gsmcpodcast.net to leave a tip. As I said before the break, Julia was talking about Cassidy, and as we get back into this next segment, we'll be talking more about character development. So let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Julia. When you sit down to write, what's your process for character development? Do you like to let that evolve as you write, or do you like to have a really good understanding before you start?
Yeah, I usually sort of discover characters as I go. A lot of that comes in revision, I think, where, I mean, there are some like with the Maggie McKee, who's like the Jessica Simpson character in this, I sort of knew right away that I wanted to be inspired by these aspects of all these different early aughts pop stars. And so like those characters that are sort of standing in symbolically as, something, those come a little more fully formed. But in terms of the characters who are totally themselves. I sort of discover it as I go, and then in revision can go back and like find what they're really interested in and what they're really doing and what really motivates them. But I definitely, I'm someone who I figure it all out sort of on the fly. Like I have a very basic idea of what the book will be and where I want it to go and sort of like points that I want to hit. But I'm definitely not an outliner, or I have friends who will do like the Proust, like ask questions of their characters of like, what is your deepest regret and what is your this? And I don't have the patience for that. I'd rather just dig in and sort of like figure them out through writing.
Right. Yeah. So we get elements of romance in the story. There's the behind the scenes aspect of Cassidy's job with reality TV, but there's also something of a mystery. So there, maybe a little bit inspired by your other writings. You stuck with that a little bit, but why that particular combination? Like, why did you put those elements together?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think that part of what I was interested in is the way that what we see on reality TV is like reality with quotation marks. It's not
Hmm.
actually like, it's not like there's a camera on the wall and we're getting access to everything that's happening in every aspect of it. Like, it's like, no, this is a very particular narrative that's chosen for us. And so I felt like having sort of a mystery element where you could frame the narrative, like the people around Cassidy can frame the narrative however they want. And she sort of starts to spiral because she's so used to sort of building a story based on all of these different parts. And so this idea of not knowing, like being so enmeshed in the world of reality television that you lose track of what's actually real and you lose track of the ability to like take things at face value. Because another thing that happens as she goes through and sort of gets further into the recording of this show and into her career is she starts to rightly or wrongly suspect people of ulterior motives because again when your whole job is watching and trying to find that moment that you can press on and manipulate somebody, you get a little like it just stands to reason that you get a little paranoid. Like even all of us today with social media are so much more aware of like what we're doing and how we're behaving and what someone might want of us than we were 20 years ago when
Hmm.
there was no sort of like gotcha moment, like no one was going to TikTok live you making your biggest mistake. And so I feel like um, part of the mystery element was trying to lean into that and all the different sort of options and ways the story could pan out depending on
Hmm.
what perspective and the way that you told it.
Yeah. How would you approach this book differently if you decided to set it maybe 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the biggest thing I think is just the knowledge that we all have now of like the surveillance of this particular culture.
Yeah.
And also though the celebrity culture has changed so much. Like this is pre-social media. This is pre um being able to come out like I guess, a celebrity could issue a statement, but it wasn't you couldn't connect and tell your side of the story. Like
Right.
now I feel like with every like there's Instagram and so someone can come out with an Instagram post and be like, "Hey, it looked like this, but here's what was actually happening." Whereas like Jessica Simpson could not do that. Like nobody, it was
Yeah.
whatever they presented her to be, that was what everybody got and she could either lean into it or like someone else would fill that role.
Yeah.
And I think that now I think people are a lot more savvy about sort of how to present themselves. And I think also that um, young women, particularly, and sort of young pop stars, just have a lot more agency and are more in control of some of these decisions that were made for them back in the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
So, on both the reality TV and the sort of pop star level.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of pop stars, both Maggie and Cassidy's love interest, Gabe, were
Mhm.
child stars. So how do you think their individual stories influence the overall arc of the story?
Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating to look at the careers of child stars and sort of the myriad ways things can go wrong or go right.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the idea of committing to what you are going to do with the rest of your life and the way that you're going to sort of support yourself and your family at such a young age is really interesting to me. And so, like, the pressures that are placed on kids who,
Hmm.
have maybe found something they love, but then it sort of becomes this thing that devours them whole, uh, is really, really fascinating. And a lot of the decisions that the characters make come from a place of sort of being too young to know what they're getting into and then having to figure out how to navigate that as they wake up to like what this entertainment world really is.
Hmm. Yeah, and the laws have changed. Thankfully, the laws have changed in many
Yes.
ways for the better because the previous generations of childhood stars had no agency, had no
Mhm.
access to any information or money, or and so
Yeah.
parents could do what they wanted. So, yeah, there are two characters in this book, as I mentioned in the beginning, and as Julia was just talking about, who are former child stars. And I feel like it's better now for children who are stars at young ages, but I don't know that for sure. And I'm sure that there are still stories, and I'm sure that there's still things that happen when you grow up in the spotlight, like some children do, that can affect your adulthood. I hope it's better, but it certainly has an effect on the two characters in this book who are secondary characters, but they're very important secondary characters, and they have an effect on the overall story. But we're going to go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, talking more about writing as a dual timeline. Not a huge chunk of time between those dual timelines, but were there any particular challenges to writing the book in that way? You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Margaux Eliot, also known as Julia Fine, depending on which books you read by her. Before the break, Julia was talking about two of the secondary characters, Cassidy's fiance and the woman on the reality TV show, the wife of that couple who worked together as child stars, and how that affects not only their stories but the story as a whole. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Julia. The book is in from two different timelines. So we get present day for Cassidy, which is 2007, and then looking back at the start of the show and kind of moving forward to this time. Were there any challenges to writing the story that way?
When I initially started, I only had the 2003, like 2002, 2003 storyline. But I realized fairly early on that like I needed something more compelling. And I also felt like having the ability to look back and reflect on sort of the naivety of the other storyline was really important. So it was tricky. I think the trickiest thing with any sort of multi-storyline project is trying to give them equal interest and like even if they don't have equal page time, make them equally compelling. And so the challenge was how to not give away sort of what was going to happen in the past to lead them to this point, but make it interesting enough that like when a reader got to the 2007 parts, they wouldn't be like, oh man, send me back there. Because we've all read books where, there's two narrators or there's two storylines and there's one that you vastly prefer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the juggling was really just like, how much of it do we need and how do you fit it in a way that sort of propels the story forward instead of slows it down?
Yeah. You don't outline. So when did you decide, not giving anything away, of course, but when did you decide how it was going to end?
When did I decide how it was going to end? My sort of initial concept for the book ended in 2000, what is it, like 2004, 2003. There's like a big event that happens. And sort of that was like where I initially thought that it would end. And then I'm not sure if it was my agent or someone out, like a friend who was like, what if you like kept going with it, like what would happen next. So I think I always knew what the sort of final scene would be. And I sort of figured it out as I went and then had to go back and sort of prune things and adjust things and move things around so that it would lead to where I wanted it to lead. But it was definitely like a discovery in the writing of it as opposed to, plotting it out and knowing from right off the bat.
Obviously, there was some research involved in maybe reality TV or those sorts of things, but was there any particular point of research that stuck out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of books about early reality television and just sort of the way that it worked and why it happened when it happened. Like so much of reality TV came out of like the writers' strike in the early 2000s and just, not having scripted television available and the reality people are non-union. The budget was so much lower, like the overhead cost of it was so low because you just send someone with a camera off to do whatever. And it really just emerged out of like practicality. And that I found really, really interesting. and also the difference between working on something scripted and reality, which is less like there's less of a there's more of an overlap now, I think, as to like how people do reality. But like in the beginning, so I read, it's really interesting. There's several oral histories of the TV show The Osbournes, which was one of the first. It was like
Mm-hmm.
MTV's first reality TV show where you basically they just were following them around with a camera,
Yeah.
available at all times, awake all night, just trying to see what would happen. And it's super interesting because the line to sort of where we are now with a lot of reality shows, especially when they're sort of about people's life or like celeb reality shows, like, everything is like, okay, they're going to go do this activity and they're going to do this thing. And like, we're going to foment a fight between these two. And in the beginning, it really was just like point and shoot, what is happening? And I just found that really, really interesting. And the other thing that I did a lot of research on was sort of the pop culture. At the time, I read a lot of memoirs um, about, by early pop stars, listened to a lot of interviews,
Mm-hmm.
just sort of the pressures put on young women in the early 2000s. And that I also think is super interesting, especially in light of sort of watching the culture. Like I feel like for a while we were shifting away from, everybody has to be 100 pounds and, this is
Mm-hmm.
like the idea of things. And it feels sort of like we're turning back that way. And it's interesting to see sort of how the cycles go and like what felt empowering at the time, but actually wasn't, and sort of what didn't seem empowering, but really was. So I find that period of time really, really interesting.
Yeah. Um, there were things that obviously I remembered, but you don't always think about. So as you're reading, and Cassidy is visiting her family at one point, and so she and Gabe are emailing each other, and I'm like, why are
Uh-huh.
they? Oh, right, they're emailing because was
I
there
know.
anything?
It's changed so quickly.
Yeah, anything like that for you, where you were like, oh, I forgot we had to do it that
There
way?
were a few things too where I would write something and my editor would be like, was this really around then? Or like, why didn't they just do this? Or like YouTube was not really around until like 2009.
Yeah,
Like it wasn't big and so there were a few things too. There's like parts where Cassidy is trying to find Gabe's like old concerts.
yeah,
And my editor was like, well, wouldn't she just use YouTube? It's like, no, no, she
no,
couldn't. Or like, was it AIM or was it MSN Messenger or what was the like? So there was a lot of that of trying to figure out exactly what the timelines were for
right.
those things. But it was fun because it's like just sort of going back to my own youth and thinking about what it was like. And in a way, it was a lot simpler, and in other ways, it was really insidious and awful. But there's a mix, and the things
Yeah,
again, like it's like the things that I thought were so bad at the time, some of them don't look so bad, and then the things that felt really normal, you look back on it now and you think like, oof. So,
yeah. I was talking to a student today. I teach English online, and she's 12, and there was a question she was studying for a test, and it said, "How do you keep in touch?" And she asked, "What does that mean, keep in touch?" So we were talking about that,
you're never
and I
out of
said,
touch now. Yeah.
and I said, when I was your age, um, email was starting to be popular, but if my friend moved away when I was little,
You
I had
wrote
to
a
write
letter.
them letters, and she
Yeah.
just went,
What is that?
"What?" Like,
Yeah. It's
blank
such a
stare.
different world.
Um, so yeah, it's fun and a little disconcerting to look back because it's not that long ago, and
No, and it feels, especially like it feels like yesterday.
yeah,
But then when you actually like do a comparison of, what Cassidy is like in her 20s, like what people in their 20s are doing now versus what they were doing in 2003, like night and day. So,
right, yeah, and the fact that 2003 is actually 23 years ago, not 3 years ago or whatever,
yep,
is
it's crazy.
sometimes hurts my feelings, but that's okay. So, yes, I am ancient, and I did used to write letters. This actually just came up again in conversation with a student today. She is 18. She is about to go to school in the United States, go to university in the United States, and she was asking about how to write a professional email. And I can't remember how exactly I asked it, but she said, "Oh, I've never written an email at all, ever." I thought, Yep, nope. I feel even older now. And so we talked about writing emails. She was amazed that we used to write emails to communicate like with friends and family to write, how are you doing? What have you been up to? This is what I've been up to. And, I used to write letters and then letters turned into email. And when I say that things have changed since 2003, they absolutely have in terms of technology, um, writing letters, writing emails, using social media, etc., etc. It's different, right? And it's very, very interesting. But it's crazy how fast things change. We're going to go ahead and take our last break of this episode. When we come back, Julia will be talking about writing this book, more romance, more contemporary fiction as opposed to the thrillers and the suspense that she normally writes. How is it different? Was it challenging, etc.? You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with Julia Fine, aka Margaux Eliot. Before the break, we were talking about the changes in technology between now and the early 2000s when this book starts. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Julia. Speaking of challenges, were there any challenges to this style of writing, which is a little bit different than the other books you write?
It was really interesting. So I feel like the pen name helped me a lot with this because it was very freeing to be able to just really embrace this concept and this idea and this type of book and not feel tied to having to have the markers of my previous books and my previous work. And so I think that before we decided, because initially I was on the fence about, like, my agent had sort of suggested using a pen name because it's such a different book. And if you were to pick this up thinking, having read my previous stuff, you would just be like, what is happening right now?
Right.
So she felt like, okay, we should do it under a different name. And I had sort of not known what that would look like or what it would mean. But I feel like during the editorial process, my editor suggested a lot of things that I was not naturally inclined to do, and that, I'm not, like, my instinct isn't always to go there. Like, none of my other books have anything near like a happy ending. And she was pushing me very much to, make it more, just lift it up a little bit. And once I sort of was like, okay, this is going to be a Margaux Eliot book, then that was a lot easier to do. And I feel like the whole thing just opened up for me. So it was hard at first. And then it was like opening a door. It was a very cool experience.
Yeah. I have trouble naming pets, so choosing a pen name for myself, I feel like would take me 5 years. Was it difficult?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of went through a few different things. So the name is my kids' names, but not spelled the way that they spell it. Which, who knows down the road what that will look like for them, But they were all for it now, in their childhoods. But once I sort of suggested it, we're like, yes, this is it. This is the one. But yeah, we didn't go through that many options. It was easier than you'd think.
That's good, because I would overthink it. And will you write? Do you think you'll write more as Margot Eliot?
Yeah, I think it probably in the future. The thing I'm working on right now is very firmly in the sort of gothic speculative space, but my guess is when I'm done with that, like it's nice to be able to sort of juggle and balance and like go from dark to light and,
Yeah,
do something more bubblegummy, popcorn fun, versus something that, feels very heavy. So
right. Yeah, it's kind of like a palate cleanser. You can
absolutely.
switch
Yeah,
back
that's a
and
good way to
forth.
describe it.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to say about what you're working on currently, other than Gothic and
Yeah,
speculative?
it's in the vein of the Julia Fine books. But that's probably it's still early. So
Still, yeah, no problem. What about what brought you to writing? Is it something you always wanted to do? Did you decide later? And like, how did that work for you?
yeah, I mean I had written and sort of told stories and was a very imaginative kid growing up, and won a few writing contests in high school, and then in college felt like, this is not a viable career. So I studied psychology and English, and then went into PR for a few years and just really didn't like it. Um, and ended up sort of thinking like if I could do anything, what would it be? And I wanted to write. And so I nannied full time for a while. I went back to school for an MFA. And I feel like the timing of it and just the circumstances were very lucky and that I was able to then turn teaching and writing like into an actual career.
Mhm.
But it definitely sort of I tried to avoid it, but it drew me back in.
I feel like psychology would be a very good basis for writing speculative fiction, kind of getting inside the
Absolutely. And
mind.
for any sort of character, I think,
Yeah,
like thinking about people and why they do what they do and what motivates them.
exactly. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write?
I think my biggest advice is like slow down, not necessarily in terms of how you're putting words on the page, but like often writers want to get to the next step and get to the next step, and like it's exciting to like get an agent or put a book out or do whatever it is, but I think we do that sometimes to the detriment of the work itself, and like the most important thing is really putting the time in and being willing to revise and sit with the material until it is the best version of itself that it can be. So I think
Mm,
my advice is like when you think you're finished, put it away for a few weeks or a few months and take it back out again and just continue to do that like
yeah.
3 or 4 times past when you feel like you want to send it out. And particularly if you're looking to get an agent with like a first novel, it you want to put your best foot forward and don't let sort of your excitement get ahead of you.
Yeah. It's not college life where you you have a deadline, and
Yeah,
whether it's done or not,
there's the
you're
only
hitting
deadline is
submit.
in your own head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you take time to read just for you and your own entertainment, what do you like to read?
Ooh, I mean, I read all across the board. Like all sorts of things. Like I just concurrently was reading the Heated Rivalry um series. And then also I actually the book Angel Down by Daniel Kraus that just won a Pulitzer
Mm.
yesterday or the day before. I had finished it like 3 days ago.
Oh, wow.
And so they're just very I read pretty widely. I like speculative fiction that is there's like, one big metaphor that everything is built around. And I like books that make me think, but the thing that really like the only thing I'm really looking for is like really good prose that speaks to me personally. And I do think that like at the sentence level, that's going to look different for everybody.
Yeah.
But if I like the way the book is written, I don't really care what it's about or what happens in it. And even if it's the most interesting concept that like feels tailor-made for me, if I don't like the sort of sentence level work,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it down. But I really like I jump all over the place in terms of reading. And there's very little that I like steer clear of. Trying to think if there's anything and I really can't. I think some of the more sort of didactic stuff I tend
Mm-hmm.
not to like.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Okay. What about your kiddos? Do they like to read?
Yeah, yeah. My little one's still learning. but we're actually reading the Ramona books, the Beverly Cleary series right now. And
Yeah.
it's really lovely because both my 5-year-old and my 9-year-old will sit and listen.
Nice.
Um, which is nice. I feel like we've had trouble finding sort of the perfect spot for both of them.
Hmm.
And then my older one he either picks up a book and then will not put it down until he's done, or he'll never ever read it. Like he either loves it right away and like is totally immersed in it, or
Hmm.
he just will never touch it. But he's a big sports kid, and so he loves a sports book. Like, there's books about kid soccer players.
Yeah.
But he recently has gotten really into, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember the author's name, but the book that I remember from my childhood is Frindle. I don't know if you ever read that one.
I don't.
It's like they're all sort of like, it's like a series of they're school stories, sort of.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought, I've bought him a lot of, and like gotten from the library a lot of sort of the kids fantasy books that I thought he would love. And he likes a good, straight, realistic fiction.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but good for him.
Yeah. I mean, my brother used to read encyclopedias, so you never know.
Yeah, as long as they're reading.
Exactly. Exactly. If people want to know more about you in both of your iterations and your books,
Yeah.
websites, social media, where can they find you?
My website is julia-fine.com, and there's a little Margaux Eliot section under there if you're looking specifically for Honeymoon Stage. And then I'm on Instagram at julia.r.fine, and then also at Margaux_Eliot.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Julia, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure you brought up or highlighted?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it all sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me about Honeymoon Stage and writing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to Julia for joining me to talk about Honeymoon Stage. Thank you again, not again, but thank you to her for her patience in getting this episode out. Thank you, as always, to you for your patience and your support of the podcast, as always. If you are a fan of, well, lots of things, contemporary fiction, romantic comedy, a little bit of romantic comedy, a little bit of mystery, some different layers in this book. Not quite historical fiction, recent historical fiction. Can we make that a thing? But maybe you are nostalgic for the early 2000s. That's a good reason to read this book. Maybe you already are familiar with Julia and her suspense novels and you want to see what this book is about. Or maybe you are new to her as an author altogether, whatever genre she's writing under. All good reasons to check out Honeymoon Stage. And if you're a fan of suspense, then I would say go check out Julia's other books as well. You get two authors for the price of, well, not the price of one, you know what I mean. Idioms can be tricky sometimes, but you get two authors from one interview in case you're looking for new authors. But thank you so much to Julia. And as I said, if you are interested in this book, definitely go check it out. Go check out Julia's other books. And if you've read any of them, I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you were intrigued by the shift in her earlier writing and now this novel, I love when authors explore lots of different options. Authors who don't write in different genres doesn't mean anything negative or bad, or not, authors who do doesn't mean anything wonderful and great. It's just very interesting to me when authors can switch to different genres and write in them and the reasons why they choose to write in those genres. But thank you again to Julia. Thank you, as always, to you, the listeners, the readers, the supporters of this podcast. I hope that you will join me for my next interview when I am speaking with author Renee Gilmore. We're switching gears from recent historical fiction, whatever you want to call it, to a memoir. This is a story about there's a couple of layers. In some ways, it's a story about the love of travel that Renee and her brother have, that Renee and her family have, of going places, of exploring places, of going on road trips and seeing new places, going on international trips, having adventures. But it's also about trauma. There are some content and trigger warnings in this book, and not so much in the conversation. So you don't have to worry too much about it. But there are some content warnings for the book. But in that those sound like two very disparate ideas, right? But no, it's really a story about hope and resilience and the things that Renee has experienced in her life and the way they have shaped her and changed her and what she has taken away from those experiences. And that is our conversation. So I hope that you will join me for that conversation on the next episode. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, and hopefully you are, since you are still listening to me talk, but please do like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching the episode on. Leaving a positive review is amazingly helpful, and thank you so much if you've already done it. Thank you so much if you plan on doing it. The world runs on algorithms. Positive reviews help that algorithm. Do the same thing for your favorite authors and your favorite books. Doesn't have to be complicated, can be very simple, but algorithms help get these books out to more readers. It helps get this podcast out to more readers. We're also on social media if you'd like to follow the podcast: Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you. Love hearing your thoughts on books. What are you reading? It's June now, so do you have summer reading plans? Will you be treating yourself to personal pan pizza if you hit your summer reading goals? Find me on social media and tell me all about it. I hope that you are having a great week. I hope June is off to a great start. I hope your May went well. But most of all, I hope what I always hope for you, and that is that no matter what's going on in your life, you somehow still find plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.